Hi friends, here's the question. Are you a Mary, a Martha, or both? And which is better? To be Mary or Martha or both? I just want to do a spoiler right here. It's both, right? It's both. So let's just establish that and look at this. There's a couple different passages in the scriptures that talk about Jesus' relationships with Mary, Martha, and also with Lazarus. Because remember that the Mary we're talking about is not Mary, the mother of Jesus, but it's Mary, the sister of Martha, and the sister of Lazarus. Okay? So Jesus comes into a village and he's meeting up with his friends, these three siblings. And Martha is just busy about many things. She's busy about hospitality, taking care of her guest, Jesus, and any of the others in his company, and maybe some other people or a lot of people in the town. She's busy about that. There's nothing wrong with it. That's good, So like if you're a Martha, that's awesome, But here is Mary, and I like to refer to Mary as the little sister. I don't know if she was actually the little sister, but the little sister, Mary, is not helping her bigger sister with the ministry of hospitality. She's what? She's sitting at the feet of Jesus and just listening to him. So Martha is a little resentful of this and says so to Jesus, right? We know the story. What does Jesus respond? He says, Martha, you're burdened with many things. And you're obviously anxious and you're worried about many things. There's only one thing, and Mary has chosen the better, and it will not be taken from her. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her. Beautiful, right? But where we go wrong here is we think somehow that Jesus is dismissing the charism, let's call it the charism, the gifts of Martha. He never dismisses that. He just simply points out that what Martha is doing first will not be taken from her. So what's going on here? It's interesting that the writer of the gospel in Luke 10, he's pointing out that when Mary is listening to Jesus, she's sitting at his feet. What does that indicate? To first the Jews that are hearing this, and then to you and I as Judeo-Christians, we can somehow lose this with history and language and culture. Well, remember that sitting at a person's feet, or even more, lying at a person's feet, prostrating yourself at a person's feet, it's a position of humility. And it's a position of homage. It's a position of worship. So think about, for instance, when the leper comes back after he's healed, what does he do to Jesus? He throws himself at the feet of Jesus. What's he doing? He's worshiping him as God. Or the woman who walks into the house of the Pharisee and she's crying at Jesus' feet, on his feet, and wiping his feet with her hair. What's she doing? She's worshiping Jesus, right? This was a position of worship, very similar to what you and I do as Catholic Christians every time we're at Mass. We kneel. And we kneel because our bodies are worshiping with our minds, with our tongues, with our prayers, with our song. So our body is taking a posture of homage and saying, I'm not equal to you. You are greater than me. And when it's in the case of God, and I worship you, I honor you, I venerate you, I adore you, I praise you, I need you, I love you, and all that. Well, in a very real way, Luke's trying to indicate that to us in regards to Mary. Mary is in a posture of worship. And this is important to us because Jesus is pointing out that she's chosen the better part. This will not be taken from her. Meaning she's starting with worship. It's not that it won't end or doesn't need to progress to service of others. In fact, it does. But if you and I, we're all called to service of God and for His greater glory, and all that we do as husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, running businesses, working for businesses, being at Mass, but not just at Mass, in our prayers and in what we choose to do with our lives, in the deeds that we perform. All of them ultimately are for the greater glory of God. And if that's the case, then this is important. God is trying to teach Martha a lesson here, but He's also trying to teach Mary a lesson, and it's the opposite of the others. Is that if we're going to be of service to other people, we first have to be of service to God. If we're truly going to help people in the name of God who need us in the variety of ways that they're going to need us, whether they're families, their friends, whether it's a committee or a ministry in a parish or an outreach to the poor, the corporal works of mercy, somebody who's lonely, somebody who we're visiting in a hospital, whatever it is, we have to first get our heads and our hearts right. And we have to allow, for instance, the Lord in worship to also do something for us. Worship is not just us pouring ourselves out, but when we pour ourselves out, we make room for God, and God could come in, for instance, and heal wounds of ego and pride, and the need for our own personal validation and acceptance, and for people to praise us when we're out doing good deeds. See, that's what can happen. It can happen to Martha. It can happen to you and I. It can happen to a priest. It can happen to a husband and wife who are keeping score with one another, right? I've done this, this, and this for you. What have you done for me? And then resentment comes in. Or I sit on 10 different committees and ministries in my parish. And you have to ask yourself the question, why are you doing that? Are you only doing it for altruistic reasons? Or is there a bit or a whole lot of you in that? Doing it so that other people could take notice of you. Look at what a great person this is. So they could praise you. So that you can find your worth in what you do as a volunteer to help other people. Because if that's our trek, it doesn't end well, right? And it doesn't end well because where it ends is when people then don't notice you or keep noticing you. Maybe they notice you in the beginning. Maybe they're grateful to you in the beginning. But then on the long term, over years, you're doing these sort of things and you're just not being noticed like you used to be, or praised or pointed out or thanked or whatever. And you grow in resentment. And then what ends up happening, starting in good, ends in bad. I'm out of here. Because we're wounded, often going in, and if those wounds don't get corrected, if they don't get healed along the way, of course we're going to be wounded along the way and at the end. And not only then are we going to be hurt, but we're going to end up hurting others and hurt the very organizations or outreaches or programs or the services that we committed ourselves so selflessly to. And so it's very important to see that it's not an either or situation with Mary and Martha. It's a both and situation. And I think when we look back on Luke 10 and do a rereading through this lens, we start to see why Jesus doesn't dismiss what Martha's doing. She's serving him, and good deeds of hospitality and anybody else that's in the house. He simply acknowledges that you first start with, the better portion is worshiping him. Because when we worship him, then an effect of that is that he heals our minds and our hearts and our motivations. He heals a lot of things when we worship him. He sets us free. And then, having worshiped God, we're able to go out and do the things that God calls us to do, rather than our wounds cause us to do, or our ego calls us to do, or our own disordered desires for validation by what we do, rather than who we are and whose we are, God's. Now, I just want to point out something here and I'll end. There's another passage, it's not in Luke, it's actually in John's Gospel, chapter 11, where Martha meets Jesus on his way to meet Martha, Mary, and Lazarus who's just died. So this is later seen, different gospel. And Mary stays at home, but Martha goes running out to Jesus. And they had this dialogue, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. And Jesus says, your brother's going to rise. And Martha says, yeah, I get that. He's going to rise at the end of the ages, because by this time the Jews believe, much like we do, like you see in the book of Revelation, that at the consummation of heaven and earth, all the dead, their bodies are going to rise. They're going to be physically resurrected. And so Martha's pointing to this, and Jesus says, yeah, but I'm the resurrection and the life. So whoever believes in me, even if he dies, he will live. And anyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And I love what Martha says. Martha says, yes, Lord, I have come to believe you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, the one who is coming into the world. Here's my thing. I don't think that Martha could have ever made such a bold and true statement of faith that you're the Son of the living God, unless that lesson in her home was learned and lived well. And I would say the same thing about Mary too, right? That probably that encounter with Jesus, and it wasn't just one in which Mary sat at his feet. Maybe Mary was back taking care of the household at this point. And Martha went on to meet Jesus. So it's not an either or thing. It's a both and. We're to learn to be both Martha and Mary. But we have to lead with our Mary. We have to lead with worship of God. Yes, at Mass, but also in a variety of other ways, like in our own prayer time, in our own home at the beginning of a day. So that when we go out into the world and into people's lives, we do have that altruistic reason. We have that desire to want to glorify God in all that we do and all that we say, rather than glorify ourselves. Are you a Mary or Martha, or are you both? Until next time, friends.